Chuck Norris got kicked out of first class and shoved to the back just 'cause he looked poor and wore an old army uniform. But 5 minutes later, when gunfire tore through the sky, panic set in, and they realized the man they threw away was the only one who could save them from a flying coffin. If that hit you hard, don't forget to drop a comment, and subscribe for more true grit stories like this. And stick around, because what Chuck does next will leave you breathless. Chuck Norris stepped through the glass doors of Reagan Airport with boots crusted in dried red mud and a military duffel that looked like it had served 2 wars of its own. His uniform, original issue Vietnam era, hung loose on his frame, faded and smudged with dirt, like he'd just come out of a foxhole. There'd been a time he couldn't walk 10 feet without a crowd. Movies, commercials, tournaments, he was everywhere. But that was a long damn time ago. Now he was headed back to Texas on flight Skylux 317. First class, seat 2A. The airline had sent him the ticket as part of their Honor Our Heroes program, though no one at the gate seemed to know what that was. He boarded without fanfare, moved slow but steady down the aisle, his duffel slung over one shoulder. He found his seat wide, leather-polished armrests, space to breathe, and lowered himself into it with a soft grunt. It was quiet for a minute, just engine hum and a few coughs. Then came the sound of heels, fast, sharp, impatient. A flight attendant, early 30s, perfect hair, perfect teeth, and a tight little name tag that read, Jessica. She stopped at his row and looked at him the way you look at someone who accidentally wandered into the wrong restroom. "Excuse me, sir," she said, lips tight. "There seems to be a mistake. This seat's been reserved for a Platinum Elite passenger. I'm going to have to ask you to move." Chuck didn't blink. "Ticket says 2A. She held out her hand. He passed the boarding pass to her and she studied it. Everything checked out: name, seat number, class. Still, her smile stayed stiff. "Yes, well, while technically that's correct, this seat is usually occupied by one of our long-term clients. A very loyal guest. We'd like to accommodate her." Chuck just looked at her, calm but direct. "Let me get this straight. You're asking me to get up so someone else can sit here, even though I already paid, even though I'm already sitting in the damn seat." Jessica didn't blink. "It's standard courtesy for our loyal Platinum members." Chuck nodded slowly, as if letting it all settle. Then he looked her square in the eye. "No," he said. "I'm not moving." Jessica's smile faded and her tone sharpened. Jessica forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She leaned in just a little, like she didn't want the others to hear, but didn't really care if they did. "Sir, I'm trying to be polite," she said, her voice sweet but laced with something sharper. "But this isn't just about your ticket. It's about standards. Presentation. Our guests expect a certain atmosphere." Her eyes darted down to his boots, then to the dirt-stained knees of his uniform. She wrinkled her nose just slightly, like something smelled off. Her gaze flicked back to his face with that same thin, practiced smile. "You'd be a lot more comfortable elsewhere," she added. "Trust me." Chuck looked at her for a long moment. He raised an eyebrow. "Is it policy to kick out veterans in uniform?" Before she could answer, a voice rang out behind her, loud, shrill, and full of entitlement. "Oh my God. Jessica, please tell me this is a joke." A middle-aged woman walked up dressed in a blinding white dress that looked more like a wedding gown than travel wear, and wearing enough perfume to choke a horse. Her eyes were sharp as blades, her chin pointed, and her lips looked freshly pumped with filler that morning. Karen Whitfield, a longtime Platinum member who treated seat 2A like it had her name engraved on it. She looked Chuck up and down like she was scanning a pile of rotting garbage. What the hell is this? Some ragged army guy, God. He looks like one of those bums that hang around the bus station. This is first class, for Christ's sake. Chuck stared straight back, unblinking. Karen let out a nasty little laugh, then turned to Jessica. Why is that musty smell sitting on top of Italian leather worth more than my wedding ring? Is this some kind of charity program today? Jessica jumped in quickly, flustered. Don't worry, Ms. Whitfield. I'm already asking him to move. Jessica turned back to Chuck, voice colder now. Sir, I'm going to ask you one last time, please relocate to the auxiliary seating in the back. If you refuse, I'll have security remove you. Chuck looked from one woman to the other. His voice stayed steady, but there was a weight behind it now. I paid for this seat, just like anyone else here. I'm tired. I've got every right to sit where I paid to sit. You don't get to kick me out just because I don't look like the people you're used to serving. Jessica opened her mouth but didn't speak. Chuck turned his eyes to Karen. And yeah, I served. 2 tours in Vietnam. That uniform you're looking down your nose at. It's older than most people on this plane. I earned this seat every damn inch of it. Karen let out a loud, theatrical laugh. The kind that wasn't really about humor, just humiliation. Earned, she said, eyes wide with mock surprise. What you think a few sweaty years crawling through rice paddies makes you important? She took a step closer, her voice rising. You people go off to war, come back broke, angry, smelling like old boots, and then think the world owes you something. Her eyes scanned the cabin like inviting the audience in. Well, let me make it clear for everyone. No one cares about your medals, Grandpa. No one cares how many tours you did or how many jungle bugs you ate. This is first class, not the VA lounge. Chuck's jaw flexed, but he didn't look away. Karen leaned in just enough to twist the knife. You serve the country cute. I own part of it. Jessica crossed her arms. Final warning, sir. Jessica leaned in, her voice still wrapped in courtesy, but the edge in her tone gave her true meaning away. She wasn't offering Chuck another seat up front. She was nudging him toward the back. Chuck didn't flinch. No, thank you, he said flatly, the words deliberate. I picked this seat because I need the leg room. I'm not here for champagne. Her smile shrank to a tight line as she nodded once, stiff and rehearsed, then spun on her heels and walked briskly toward the front of the cabin, though her eyes flicked back at him every few steps. From behind, a hushed voice floated into the cabin air like smoke. I really appreciate you handling this. Karen murmured her words just loud enough for others nearby to catch. It wasn't gratitude. It was confirmation. Trevor, the cabin supervisor, soon appeared. His steps clipped and his chest puffed out with the silent weight of middle management self-importance. His stride screamed authority, the kind that had never truly been tested. He stopped beside Chuck's seat, folding his arms just tight enough to stretch the sleeves of his blazer. Sir, I'm going to need you to relocate to accommodate one of our VIPs. He announced, volume turned up just enough for the rows ahead and behind to catch every word. It wasn't a suggestion. Chuck slowly looked up, his expression calm as still water, though the years behind his eyes told a longer story. This wasn't the first time he'd been told to move so someone else could sit more comfortably. I've already shown my boarding pass, he said evenly. Platinum status, seat 2A. My name's on it. Trevor's jaw stiffened, his professional mask cracking just slightly. A vein near his temple pulsed as he leaned in close, the condescension in his voice thick as syrup. Maybe you're not familiar with how we do things around here, he said, slow and patronizing, as if explaining directions to someone who couldn't read a street sign. We make certain exceptions for passengers with expectations. Our priority is to make sure preferred clients receive the experience they're accustomed to. Around them, the air in first class grew heavier. Jessica took a step closer, dropping the fake smile altogether now. Her voice lowered but turned colder like ice under the surface. "Sir, if you don't comply," she said, "I'll be forced to call airport security. They'll remove you from this flight physically if necessary. We're not going to argue about this any further." Chuck looked at her a long second. He could have stood his ground. He could have made a scene. God knows he'd had worse fights in tighter spaces. But not today. Not when all he wanted was to get home. So he stood slow, steady, not defeated, just done. He picked up his bag and walked past them without a word. Karen flinched and pulled her coat tighter as if he might brush against her. "Ugh," she muttered with a dramatic sniff, fishing a designer sanitizer from her purse and spritzing it in the air like holy water. "I'll need that seat disinfected before I sit down." Jessica didn't speak. She just led him toward the back of the plane, not to economy, not even to a regular seat. She took him to a folding chair bolted to the wall near the rear galley next to the storage closet, the kind of spot meant for deadheading staff or emergency overflow. There was no cushion, no window, just the smell of cleaning fluid and the distant clank of the drink cart. Chuck sat down without a word. No anger, no complaint, just silence. Outside, the rain had started, soft at first, then tapping harder against the skin of the fuselage. Far-off thunder rolled like a memory trying to come back. He rested his hands on his knees and stared at nothing. For a while it stayed like that. Nothing but the low drone of engines and the quiet murmur of people up front. Flight attendants murmuring about drink orders, someone flipping through a magazine, the shuffle of shoes down the aisle. The plane had leveled out. Cruising altitude. 35,000 feet above a country full of noise Chuck no longer trusted. He wasn't thinking about the seat anymore. He wasn't even thinking about Karen or Jessica or whatever apology the airline might draft after the incident. There was a shift in the cabin so small most folks missed it. A sound that didn't match anything else. A zipper where there shouldn't be one. A low thump, like metal tapping plastic. Then a man in coach stood up too fast, yanked open the overhead bin and pulled something long and black from inside. It was a rifle, not a hunting rifle. Military grade. Cold and matte and unforgiving. The first shot went straight into the ceiling. It echoed like thunder in a cave. Sharp. Brutal. Lights flickered. A woman screamed. Another man jumped up from the other side of the plane, same move, same gun. And then two more. 4 total. 1 in each section. Economy. Business. First. And the tail. They moved fast, shouting in some dialect Chuck didn't recognize, but it didn't matter. The message was universal. Hands up, heads down, eyes closed. Passengers shrieked and dropped. Phones skittered across the floor. A man tried to stand up and got the butt of a rifle to the chest. He crumpled hard between 2 rows and didn't move. In first class, someone knocked over a champagne flute. The glass cracked underfoot. Karen was screaming, pressing herself into the bulkhead wall, mascara streaking down both cheeks like war paint. The plane just moments ago civilized and smug and safe had turned into a flying trap with steel walls and nowhere to run. Chuck stayed still. One of the terrorists, maybe 25, lean and twitchy, swept into the back section, checking cargo doors and lavatory stalls. He spotted Chuck sitting in the emergency crew seat and gave him a quick once-over. Dirty fatigues, muddy boots, gray hair, no phone, no fear. Chuck hadn't heard the footsteps until they were nearly on him. Chuck turned his head just slightly enough to catch movement in his periphery. Chuck stiffened only for a second. Then it came back. The breath slowed. Muscles loosened without going limp. He didn't move a finger more than necessary, just observed. He didn't see a threat, just another tired old man. He grunted and kept walking. Chuck let him pass. Eyes locked on the rifles make the position of the man's hands, the way his jacket bulked unnaturally on one side vest, or explosives hard to tell at this angle. Memorized the stride, the pattern. Gun in his right hand, finger on the trigger guard, but not inside. Jacket puffed in the chest, probably where he kept the explosives. The kid was high-strung, dangerous, but not trained. That gave Chuck options. Then came another sound. Soft, not part of the chaos. A small shuffle behind one of the cargo containers. Chuck slowly shifted his eyes. Didn't move his head. A girl. Couldn't be older than 12. Curled up behind a rolling crate of emergency blankets. Pale face, big eyes, breathing fast. But she wasn't screaming. She wasn't crying. Just staring at him frozen like a deer. He gave her a look, steady, calm, nothing sudden. She blinked. He raised 2 fingers, tapped his lips, and gave a small nod. Quiet. She nodded back. Chuck thought for a beat. He didn't know her name. Didn't know if she had a parent on board or had wandered back here. Didn't know anything except that she was small, quick, and terrified, and that might be enough. He leaned slightly toward her. Whispered, "Hey, you scared?" She nodded fast. "You trust me?" Another nod. Chuck looked toward the aisle. No one in sight for the moment. The last terrorist had passed. He'd be looping back any second. "You're gonna cry," Chuck whispered. "Loud as you can. Right now. Run into the aisle and yell for help, just for 2 seconds. Then drop down and cover your ears." She hesitated, lips trembling. "Do it now," he said, firmer. And she did. She leapt out into the middle of the narrow aisle and let out a scream that tore through the back of the plane like sirens. "Help! Help! Mommy!" Chuck could hear the terrorist turning, boots hitting steel. The girl dove flat. Chuck rose like a ghost, silent and fast. He reached up to the narrow gap between the ceiling panels, grabbed the old maintenance cable that ran above the jump seats, and waited. The man turned into the corridor, gun raised. Too late. Chuck dropped. Boots hit the man's shoulders first. Then Chuck's full weight slammed down, sending both of them crashing to the floor. Before the man could shout, Chuck had wrapped that cable around his neck and yanked it tight. The gun skidded. The man kicked, flailed, but Chuck had leverage and age on his side, and the kind of anger that lived bone deep. It was fast and brutal. A strike to the throat to cut the air, a sharp shot to the ribs to take the fight, and then the finishing blow, a closed fist straight to the temple. The man's head snapped sideways against the metal frame with a sickening thud. He dropped like a sack of wet laundry, eyes rolling back out cold. Chuck stood over him, breathing steady. He bent down, checked for a pulse still there. Unconscious. No need to kill. The struggle lasted 7 seconds. Chuck rolled off the body and grabbed the gun. He looked at the girl. She hadn't moved. Still on her stomach, shaking, but alive. Chuck crawled to her, put a hand on her back. "You're okay," he said, low and steady. "It's done. You did good." She turned her face toward him, cheeks wet, blue eyes wide, glassy. He guessed she was maybe 11 or 12 tops. Long brown hair, tangled, no shoes. "My name's Chuck," he said. "What's yours?" "Lucy," she whispered. "All right, Lucy. You stay right here a little longer. I need 5 minutes. Just 5. Then I'm gonna come back and we're both gonna get out of this all right. She gave a shaky nod. He pulled the rifle's sling over his shoulder and checked the fallen man's vest. Light armor, nothing reinforced. Pockets full of ammo wire chewing gum and a two-way radio. Chuck took the radio, slung it to his belt, and gave the man one last look, still breathing, still out cold. Good. He didn't enjoy hurting people. But when they came in with rifles, took kids hostage, and thought nobody'd push back, well, they asked for the pain themselves. Chuck stood and turned toward the narrow service corridor heading forward. The back of the plane was quiet now, but he knew better than to trust silence. Planes weren't built for combat. They were built for comfort, speed, and safety. But if you'd spent enough time in the jungle or in kitchens and barns for that matter, you knew how to find the spaces in between. Gaps nobody looked at. Places only the people who worked behind the curtains ever noticed. He passed an overturned food cart and snatched what he could: a metal fork, a roll of duct tape, a pair of earbuds, and a ballpoint pen. All of it went into his jacket pockets. Tools, not weapons, at least, not until you needed them to be. He made his way into the passenger cabin by hugging the edges of the service hall, crouching between the backs of unused crew jump seats and wall panels. Through the slats of the divider, he spotted one of the terrorists pacing the aisle slowly. Tall, muscular, carrying an assault rifle with the muzzle tilted downward, but his fingers never left the trigger guard. Chuck paused, listened. The radio on his hip buzzed with static, then came a voice accented fast. Front is clear. Aisle 1 through 5 secured. Check rear. Repeat. Check rear. Over. Chuck lowered the volume quickly and turned away from the direct path. He glanced back toward where Lucy was hiding and then moved toward the midsection. He needed to stay ahead of their rotation. If they were working in zones, that meant someone would be circling back soon. He couldn't risk Lucy being spotted. A passenger, an older man in coach, maybe mid-60s, bald glasses, half crooked on his face, looked up at him. Their eyes met. Chuck put a finger to his lips. The man froze, then gave the smallest nod imaginable. That's all Chuck needed. As he pressed forward, something caught his attention. Behind the curtain that separated business class from economy, a clattering sound like something metal being kicked by mistake. Then a grunt, a barked order, a scream. Chuck gritted his teeth and moved low, slipping past the divider and around a rolling cart half covered in blankets. Another terrorist stood mid-aisle yelling at a man in a suit. A woman sobbed behind them holding a child. The suit tried to talk hands raised but got a shove to the chest for his trouble. The rifle swung. Too wide, too aggressive, sloppy. This guy had no training either. Chuck reached into his pocket, pulled the earbuds out, and stretched the cord. He ducked behind a seat row and waited for the right angle. The gunman turned away for half a second, barking into his radio again. Chuck took it. He moved quick and quiet, looped the cord around the man's neck, and yanked back with both hands. The rifle clattered. The man's feet scrambled for grip on the carpeted aisle. Chuck slammed him backward, pinning him between two seats, and drove his knee into the side of his leg. The man collapsed sideways. Chuck didn't need to finish the fight. The gunman passed out cold after a final twist of the cord and a blow to the jaw with the butt of his own weapon. Passengers gasped, but said nothing. Chuck whispered, "Stay down." He took the rifle, another radio, and the man's utility belt. Same setup, same vest. But this one had a flight manifest stuffed in the side pocket, names highlighted. Karen's was circled in red ink, so they'd come looking for her specifically. Chuck clicked the radio. A voice came through again. "Target not located. Proceeding to cabin 1. All positions hold. Chuck's stomach turned. They were moving forward, toward first class, toward the hostages, and toward the cockpit. He turned back. "Lucy," he muttered under his breath. He found the nearest maintenance hatch, a narrow slit in the wall behind the drink storage. It took some effort, but the latch popped and he slipped inside. The crawl space ran the length of the aircraft, not tall enough to stand, but wide enough to move in a crouch. Pipes and wires hugged the edges, and it smelled like metal and dust and old insulation. Only mechanics or cabin engineers used it, perfect for what he needed. He crawled forward inch by inch, sweat beginning to pool under his collar. His knees screamed with every push, and his back wasn't built for this kind of posture anymore, but it was better than taking the aisle and risking gunfire. Through a vent ahead, he caught a glimpse of first class. 3 hostages were on their knees, Karen among them, makeup-smeared heels gone. Her hands shook as she clung to the leather armrest of seat 2A like it was the last piece of earth left. A male passenger, maybe in his 40s, had blood on his sleeve. Jessica was off to the side, arms raised, trying to keep her voice from cracking. "Please, nobody here is trying to resist. We're just passengers, just folks trying to get home." She was talking slow and careful, like walking barefoot on glass. Trevor stood near the front galley, doing his best to nod along like everything was under control, though his eyes kept darting toward the cockpit. "You don't want to hurt these people," Trevor said, voice tighter. "You've made your point. Just take what you need and—" "Shut mouth," one of the gunmen barked, accent thick. The words chopped but loud enough to make the row of heads duck even lower. The tallest of the group, stocky leather vest over a tactical shirt, stomped toward Jessica. He waved his rifle in the air. "Always talk, 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 talk. You rich pigs never shut up." Another younger one, barely 20 maybe, stalked the aisle with nervous energy, barrel of his gun bouncing slightly as he moved. His English was more broken. "Your country. Always bomb us, always steal. And now you fly in sky like you own it." Karen, still on her knees, couldn't help herself. "Oh, please," she snapped. "You low-life psychos can't even form a sentence and you think anyone's impressed." Trevor's face went white. Jessica whispered, "Karen, please." But Karen had worked herself up. The fear turned bitter and sharp. "You're nothing," she hissed. "Just dust with guns. You think waving rifles around makes you powerful. You're just angry. Nobody's from nowhere." The tall one turned. He walked up behind her slowly, the muzzle of his gun pointed straight at the back of her head. The entire row behind her held their breath. "You want silence?" he asked. "I give you silence forever." Karen froze. He grabbed a fistful of her hair and yanked her head back. She screamed, "Please wait. I can pay. I have money." Her voice cracked like glass. "You want money? I can wire anything. Just don't kill me, please." The young one spat on the floor near her knee. "We don't want your filthy money." The older one leaned in close. "You people always think money can buy soul, but yours already rotten." Karen broke. She started sobbing, chest-heaving, breath-hitching sobs that had no rhythm. A wet stain spread from under her skirt. The smell hit a second later. The whole cabin noticed. She didn't care anymore. Chuck saw all of it from the crawl space. He'd tracked the layout earlier, the way the service tubes curved, where the lights cut sharp corners, where a man could vanish between walls. He counted the gunmen again. 3 in this cabin. 2 now focused on Karen. The third keeping eyes near the front, blocking access to the cockpit. He had maybe 10 seconds. From his pocket, he pulled a bottle of leftover champagne he'd snagged from the abandoned drink cart. wrapped in a napkin tucked with two metal forks, quick and dirty, but enough to make a distraction. He twisted his body sideways, careful not to make a sound, and nudged open the ceiling panel above row 2D. He didn't need a perfect throw, just noise and confusion. He tossed the bottle. It shattered against the wall with a loud crack, and the forks clattered like silverware in a garbage disposal. Lights flickered. Passengers screamed. The tall ones spun around. That was enough. Chuck dropped from the ceiling like a ghost with bones. He landed hard on the first guy's back, driving him down into the aisle. The gun clattered. Chuck kicked it away before the second one could reach for his own. The younger one raised his rifle finger, shaking on the trigger, but Chuck already had the metal tray from the overhead galley in hand. He flung it like a lid. It cracked against the kid's face, knocking him into the wall. Then Chuck moved in. 2 strikes to the ribs, a third to the chin. The kid dropped fast, moaning eyes rolling back. The third guy, the one near the cockpit, had turned gun half raised, but Chuck was already on top of him. He slammed the guy's forearm into the wall, elbowed him in the throat, then drove his knee into the man's thigh. The terrorist's legs buckled. Chuck grabbed his collar and flung him sideways into the door. 1, 2, 3, unconscious. 10 seconds flat. Silence fell, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not fear, but awe. Passengers stared. Jessica's hand was over her mouth. Karen, eyes wide, smeared makeup knees, wet, locked eyes with Chuck. Her lips moved. Nothing came out. Chuck looked at her, saw everything. The terror, the stink of money, the deep-down fear of someone realizing the world doesn't bend for them anymore. He said nothing, just turned away. "Secure their guns," he told Trevor without looking back. Trevor moved like he'd been yanked from sleep. Yeah. Yes. Right away." Chuck knelt and pulled zip ties from the vest of the man he'd dropped. Bound the wrists tight, then did the same to the others. Took their radios, checked for detonators. Nothing yet. But they were close to the front now. Jessica finally found her voice. I didn't know you could... she stopped herself. Her eyes searched his. "I was wrong about you." Chuck stood up. "There's still work to do." He checked the nearest rifle, then slung it over his shoulder. The rest of the cabin remained quiet. A couple passengers began to cry. One woman started praying, clutching a cross around her neck. Chuck didn't stop for any of them. He moved toward the front, toward the cockpit, toward whatever came next. The hallway leading to the cockpit was tight, dim, and full of old mechanical smells, warm wiring, coffee residue, sweat. Trevor walked in front, holding his hands up, careful not to make a sound louder than his shoes could explain. Chuck moved behind him, quiet, as a shadow rifle slung across his shoulder, eyes locked on every corner, every flicker, every noise. Trevor was pale, breathing sharp through his nose. He looked like a man still shaking from seeing the world turn upside down, but he was trying hard not to crack. "You sure you're ready?" Chuck asked under his breath. Trevor didn't turn, just gave a short nod. "I'm not built for this," he whispered, "but I'm the only one who's been inside that cockpit since they took it. I know where they stand. Who's armed? The rest, that's on you." Chuck grunted. "Fair enough." Ahead, the reinforced door separating the cockpit from the cabin stood shut, but a smaller access panel to the jump seat corridor was ajar. That's where they were headed. One way in, one way out. Inside, they could already hear voices, 2 distinct foreign accents, and another American coming through the cockpit's mounted radio. The channel was open. The negotiations were underway. Flight 31 we repeat, this is the FBI crisis unit. We're here to listen. No one wants bloodshed today. Tell us your demands again. We're standing by. Silence. Then the lead terrorist's voice cut in low and sharp. No demands. This isn't trade. You want to understand. We make statement. Plane goes down. With everyone. A message. That's all. Another voice in the background, calm but urgent. You don't have to do this. We can talk. We can resolve this without more death. Let's work together. The terrorist scoffed. Talk. You want talk now? After 20 years of bombing our homes, propping up dictators, stealing land with ink and lies? No. There's no talk. You listen. Trevor closed his eyes for a second, steadied his breath. They've got the captain flying circles, won't let him land. Says if wheels touch ground, they pull the trigger. No negotiations. Chuck nodded. You said one of them drinks coffee every 20 minutes, like clockwork. Gets twitchy if he doesn't. Chuck thought a second. At our window, Trevor looked at him. If it's gonna work, it's then. Chuck glanced down at his pockets. Duct tape steel coffee straw, a folded fork from the service cart, one of the zip ties he hadn't used. Nothing fancy. Just things he knew how to use in the right hands. He adjusted his jacket, felt the pistol under his ribs. You'll hand him the drink, Chuck said. Don't shake. Don't rush. Once he takes it, I move. We good. Trevor nodded again, his face going paler by the second. Chuck squeezed his shoulder. You did all right so far. Trevor didn't answer, just moved into place, standing where the cockpit door opened up, eyes on the latch. From behind the cockpit wall, the terrorist's voice grew louder. Land the plane and we blow it. I will not be paraded on television like some clown. You don't get to win. Not this time. The FBI negotiator tried again. There are children on board. Do you hear them crying? You want their lives on your conscience? No, came the answer. I want their country to finally feel loss. Chuck closed his eyes. He'd heard that kind of voice before, not in a language, but in a tone. The kind that wasn't bluffing, the kind that didn't flinch. Trevor raised the tray, a paper cup with a fresh brew. No poison, no sedative, just a plan. The cup had a pinhole poked near the base. It would leak slow, steady, just enough to get attention. A voice snapped from inside. Where's the coffee? Trevor stepped forward. Coming right up, he said, trying to sound casual. The cockpit door cracked open, just a few inches. A hand reached out, took the cup. The door didn't shut. Trevor stepped back. Then it happened. The man in the cockpit cursed loudly. It's leaking, you idiot! Chuck took that as the mark. He moved. Fast. He kicked the side door wide and charged in. The first terrorist still had the coffee in his hand, dripping hot liquid on his pants. Chuck brought the butt of his rifle up and slammed it straight into the man's jaw. The cup flew. The man collapsed. The second raised his gun. Chuck ducked, rolled forward under the angle of fire, grabbed the pilot's metal clipboard from the dash and flung it like a hammer. It cracked the terrorist across the temple. The man stumbled, rifle slipping sideways. Chuck didn't wait. He surged forward, grabbed the man by the vest, yanked him down, and drove a knee into his ribs, knocking the wind clear out of him. The struggle lasted 6 seconds. When the noise stopped, both terrorists were unconscious on the floor. The pilot, Captain Reynolds, was frozen, hands still locked to the controls. Sweat dripped from his forehead. You all right, Chuck? Asked, steadying his breath. Reynolds looked at him like he'd seen a ghost. Who the hell are you? Chuck gave a half shrug. Used to take down full platoons in Nam with my hands. This ain't all that different. Reynolds blinked, then gave a shaky laugh. Thank God. Behind them, the co-pilot, still duct-taped to his seat, let out a groan. Chuck grabbed the radio. "Control, this is Flight 317, he said, voice clear. "Threat neutralized. Cockpit secured. You're clear to guide us in." There was silence on the other end for a second. Then a woman's voice replied, cracking with relief. "Flight 317, we copy. Say again, threat neutralized." Chuck glanced at the two unconscious bodies. "Solid copy. 2 down. Plane's back in good hands." A sigh came through the speaker. Then a burst of chatter as commands were relayed. Trevor stepped into the cockpit behind Chuck, eyes wide. Is it really over?" Chuck turned to him. "For now," he said. Reynolds wiped his face. "God help us, man. You just saved 300 souls." Chuck gave a small nod. "Just trying to get home." After 30 minutes, finally, the wheels kissed the tarmac smoother than anyone expected. A soft bump, then the long breath of deceleration. For the first time in hours, people dared to hope again. The cabin stayed quiet. Not out of discipline, just exhaustion. Everyone was waiting to be told it was really over, that they could unclench their hands, that they'd made it. Through the cockpit door, Chuck stood off to the side, arms crossed, eyes watching the forward galley door. He hadn't sat back down since taking the cockpit. No part of him could rest yet, not until he saw sunlight again. Captain Reynolds adjusted his collar and keyed the intercom. His voice was calm but deeper than before, like something had shifted inside. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, pausing a beat, "we have landed safely. I want you to stay seated. Authorities will board in just a moment. You are secure. I repeat, you are safe now." Applause broke out in scattered pockets, more from relief than celebration. A woman began sobbing openly. A man let his head fall back against the headrest and whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Chuck didn't move. Outside, flashing lights began to dance across the fuselage. Red, blue, yellow. Sirens cut through the cabin wall like wind through barn slats. Through the cockpit window, dozens of uniforms waited. Security, SWAT, EMS. Some stood with weapons drawn. Others held cameras, phones, microphones. The news had gotten out. Captain Reynolds took a deep breath, wiped his hands down his pants, and turned to Chuck. "Come with me," he said. Chuck looked at him. "You sure?" Reynolds nodded. "They need to see who brought us down." The cabin door opened. Sunlight flooded in. And then came the sound, an avalanche of flash shutters, voices shouting questions, and the unmistakable electricity of media chaos. Captain Reynolds stepped out first, arms raised to wave off the security detail. He walked halfway down the portable stairs, stopped, turned, and motioned behind him. "This man," he said loud and clear, "saved every soul on this plane. He is the reason we're alive." Chuck stepped out slowly. The noise spiked instantly. Photographers surged forward, news crews leaning over each other, flashes lighting up like fireworks. Chuck reached up and pulled off his old military cap, the one he'd worn since Vietnam. His hair was shorter now, gray all over, but his face was still unmistakable to anyone over 40. A gasp swept through the crowd. Someone whispered it first. Then someone said it louder. "It's Chuck Norris." No one had seen him publicly in years. Not on talk shows, not on the internet. He'd slipped out of the spotlight a decade ago. Rumors flew. Some said he was sick. Some said he'd moved to the mountains. Some said he'd died. But there he was. Real. Alive. standing at the top of the airplane's stairwell like a living myth. And then it hit. A wall of sound all at once, the kind that makes your ears ring and your heart stutter for a beat. Reporters surged forward, cameras up, flashes firing like lightning in a summer storm. Voices layered over each other, one after another. "Is that who I think it is? Chuck Norris? Sir, is it true you stopped the hijackers? Mr. Norris, where have you been all these years? How did you overpower the terrorists? What went through your mind when the plane was under threat?" Click, click, flash, shouts. Dozens of microphones pointed like rifles. People shouting questions faster than anyone could answer. Captain Reynolds had started to descend the stairs, waving at the crowd, doing his best to keep things orderly. Then he paused, slowly turned. He looked up at the man standing just behind him, saw the sharp jaw, the narrow eyes, the quiet way he held himself like someone who'd walked through worse than fire and come out quieter, not louder. "Wait a damn second," Reynolds whispered under his breath. You're Chuck Norris." Chuck gave him a sideways look, didn't blink. The captain blinked for both of them. "I thought you were off the grid," Reynolds muttered. "I thought you were... Hell, I don't know what I thought." Chuck didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say. He just adjusted the old military cap in his hand, took one step forward, and faced the storm. Flashes lit up the runway. Camera bulbs popped so fast they blended into one. It wasn't just press. Airport workers had pulled out their phones too. Security teams froze mid-step. A medic dropped her clipboard. All eyes were on him, Chuck Norris, standing there in worn boots and a dusty jacket, quiet as stone. A man no one expected, but a name no one had forgotten. Then the crowd parted and a small figure burst through. "Daddy." It was Lucy. She ran straight up the stairs and into Captain Reynolds' arms. They both cried him, kneeling to squeeze her like he never planned to let go again. Then she turned, looked up at Chuck, wide-eyed, and ran into his arms too. Chuck caught her like she weighed nothing. Captain Reynolds rose to his feet, voice shaking. "She's my daughter," he said to the cameras. "He saved her. He saved all of us." Chuck looked down at Lucy, then back at the sea of reporters and flashing lenses. "She's the real hero today," he said. "She was braver than most adults I've met. If she hadn't stepped up, none of this would have worked." Lucy blushed and buried her face in Chuck's shoulder. The crowd went quiet for a second. One reporter near the front asked Mr. Norris, "Do you consider yourself a hero?" Chuck looked at the man. Then he looked past him at all the people staring, some crying, some silent, some too proud to admit they were scared earlier. He shook his head. "I'm not a hero," he said. "I'm just a man who did what was right. Because sometimes that's all a man can do." He paused, glanced back at the plane. "You don't get to pick how people see you. Some see money, some see clothes, some see age or dirt on your boots. That don't matter. What matters is what you do when someone else is in trouble. That's what defines you, not how clean you look, not how loud you talk, not how many points you got in your reward program." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Back in the doorway of the aircraft, Jessica stood beside Trevor, both still in uniform. Jessica's eyes were red. Trevor stood stiff as a fence post. Neither of them moved. Chuck didn't look directly at them, but his voice slowed. "I fought for this country once, not for medals, not for speeches. I did it so folks could live without fear, so even the ones who don't see people like me as equals could still go home safe. That's the job of a soldier, to do the right thing, even if nobody thanks you for it. Jessica's hand went to her mouth. Trevor looked at the ground. Somewhere near the edge of the crowd, Karen Whitfield stood half hidden behind two journalists. Her arms were crossed. Her designer jacket hung awkwardly from one shoulder. She didn't say anything, just watched. Chuck put his hand gently on Lucy's shoulder. "Now, if y'all don't mind," he said, "I'd like to get this girl a hot meal and find somewhere quiet." He turned, nodded to Reynolds, and began walking down the steps. No further questions, no more words. Just silence behind him as he moved through the crowd, Lucy in hand, like a man walking off the battlefield one last time. It didn't take long. By nightfall, Chuck Norris was everywhere again, but not in the way he used to be. This time it wasn't commercials or fight clips or memes. It was headlines. It was morning news. It was veteran centers posting his name next to theirs and calling it something they hadn't felt in years: hope. People called him the hero of Flight 317. He hated that name, but it stuck. Skylux Airlines issued a formal apology within 12 hours of landing, not just for the attack, for the treatment Chuck received before it. The CEO held a press conference, shaking visibly, as he introduced a new policy on anti-discrimination mandatory training and a review of employee conduct. Jessica volunteered to be the public face of the campaign. She sat beside Chuck at his invitation and admitted she had judged someone by the wrong standards. Said she'd never forget what it looked like when someone she dismissed became the one who saved her life. Chuck didn't say much during the event, but afterward he launched something of his own. A program, a fund, a mission. It was called Heroes in Silence. It wasn't flashy, no celebrity endorsements, no launch parties, but it did the work. It found forgotten veterans, the ones living out of trucks or halfway houses or not at all. It helped them get therapy, a roof, a second shot at dignity. Chuck didn't run it. He just showed up sometimes, talked, listened. And that was the story of Chuck Norris on Flight 317. Now take a deep breath. Let it sink in. This wasn't just a thriller about a hijacking or some heroic action sequence. It was a story about dignity, about judgment, and about how we treat people we think are beneath us. Chuck was overlooked because of his appearance, dismissed for looking dirty or old, and treated like a burden by people who thought wealth and image mattered more than character. But when everything fell apart, when bullets were flying and lives were hanging by a thread, it wasn't the platinum status that saved anyone. It wasn't the perfume or the power or the price of a seat. It was the man sitting in silence, carrying the weight of wars past, still ready to fight for strangers who looked down on him. There's something deeply human about that, something powerful. This story reminds us that real strength doesn't need attention, that kindness, courage, and integrity don't wear fancy clothes. And sometimes the very people we dismiss, the veterans, the quiet ones, the folks who don't fit into our polished little boxes, they're the ones who save us in the end. So tell me, what did this story make you feel? Have you ever judged someone too quickly? Do you believe in second chances, not just for others, but for yourself too? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take on it. And if you felt something from this story, share it. Let's keep telling stories that make us think, feel, and hopefully treat each other a little better. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one.